specify what is the y-axis, specify what is the x-axis, specify the parameters, the intercepts, everything you can specify, and then you can proceed. This is what we do generally for all graphs. In the same way, suppose the pressure is specified and you are required to find out the temperature. In that case, you will be proceeding in the same way. The pressure is specified, guess T, corresponding to the T, find out P1 saturated, find out P2 saturated, proceed in this particular way, find out the sigma, the y's, and then find out if sigma y is equal to 1. If it is 1, your guess was correct, and accordingly you can repeat the whole thing for different x's. Now, if you proceed in that particular way, then in that case, and if you are plotting the t versus x and the t versus y graph, naturally you are going to get a graph something of this sort. We find out that this graph, in this graph, this is the t. It's better that I use small t for your degree centigrade temperature and capital T for your absolute temperature. So therefore, this gives your t versus y1 graph. This gives you your t versus, this is t versus x1 graph. This gives you the t versus y1 graph. It is just the reverse of the graph which you have got here. Here p versus x was the upper part. Quite naturally, at high pressures you have a liquid region. If it is isothermally expanded, then you enter a vapor region, and in this particular case, at higher temperatures you get a vapor. If you cool the vapor at constant pressure, then it gradually condenses and forms the liquid state, right? So therefore, in this particular graph, if you observe, see, when we were dealing with single component systems, what did we observe? That suppose you have started with a liquid, you start heating the liquid at one particular temperature, which is at what temperature the liquid, it gets converted to the vapor for a pure component, single component substance?
Saturation.
Yes, please.
Saturation.
Or to be more, means what to say, more simple, it's the boiling point.
Boiling point.
The saturation temperature is nothing but it is the boiling point of the liquid. Now, when we reach the boiling point of the liquid, what happens? The temperature remains constant, the pressure remains constant, and the liquid, it keeps on getting converted into the vapor phase. The temperature and pressure remain constant as long as the phase change process occurs. And when the entire liquid has converted to the vapor at the same temperature, which is the boiling temperature, and at the liquid at this particular condition is known as the saturated liquid. When this entire liquid has converted to the vapor, till that time the temperature and pressure remains constant. When we have obtained the entire component in the vapor phase, after that the temperature starts rising, and in this particular zone it is known as the superheated vapor zone. So therefore, below the saturated, below the boiling point, we have a subcooled liquid. At the boiling point, we have got a saturated liquid, which gets converted into the vapor at the same temperature and pressure. The vapor under this condition is known as the saturated vapor. The saturated vapor and the saturated liquid are in equilibrium with one another. And as long as this phase change occurs, the temperature and pressure remains constant. Then, moment the entire saturated liquid has converted to the saturated vapor, only after that the temperature starts rising, and under this condition it is known as the superheated vapor. If you remember the, if you just remember the PV diagram we had started with an isotherm, and then we get something of this sort. So this is the superheated vapor region. This is the two-phase region where the liquid at the saturated condition is in equilibrium with the vapor at the saturated condition. Both of these are joined by a horizontal line, which shows that this line is at constant pressure, and this graph, since it is at a constant temperature, so this line we say this is an isothermal isobaric line, or this is an isotherm and an isobar. And then when we enter this particular zone, in this particular case we have got a subcooled liquid. Here we have got a subcooled liquid, we have got a superheated vapor here. This is the liquid vapor two-phase zone, right? And here, if you remember, you must have already done this. There are some constant quality lines which signifies the proportion of liquid and vapor of that single component as phase change proceeds. So this you definitely recall. You have already done this, yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So in the suppose instead of one component, now we take two components, right? And in these two components, say we start from the vapor region. Say suppose we start from this particular point. I'll do it with red so that you can see. We start from this particular point, right? So at this particular point, at a very high temperature, and we are plotting it, say, at a constant pressure, it's important to specify this. At this point, we have started with a binary mixture of, say, component 1 and 2, and we are trying to plot again the mole fraction of the more volatile component in this particular case. So therefore, in this particular condition, what do you think will be the state of the binary mixture?
Superheated.
What will be the state of the binary mixture under this condition at this high temperature?
Superheated vapor.
Superheated. Only one voice is not something very good. I would like others to respond. These are very simple things, so I do not think you should have any problems. So I would request others to respond as well. We are having a superheated vapor. Now we gradually at constant pressure, see, suppose we are having a closed container, and in that particular closed container, we have kept this particular superheated vapor. The pressure here, it's constant, say it's at atmospheric pressure. We gradually start cooling the mixture here by either introduction of heating coils, or maybe by passing cooling water here. Whatever it is, we start cooling this particular mixture, or rather this particular mixture that we have. Now as we cool, what do you expect? When we start cooling, say the composition is some particular composition in the vapor phase, right? So we put it as Y feed. As we start cooling, what do you expect? We expect that when we start cooling, naturally the temperature is getting decreased at constant pressure. So therefore this point, it is going to follow a straight vertical line, and the composition remains unchanged at YF. This keeps on continuing till the superheated vapor reaches the saturated condition. At the saturated condition, what do you expect?
Ma'am, the saturation condition, we will like just take out the vapor and convert it into liquid.
Just a minute. Just a minute. Just listen to me carefully, okay? We are cooling the superheated vapor. When the superheated vapor reaches the saturated portion, the first drop of liquid appears, right? The condensation starts and the first drop of liquid appears. Now, what will be the composition of this liquid? If you want to know the composition of the liquid, you simply have to follow this horizontal line and come to the saturated liquid region. Why? Because this horizontal line, this is at constant temperature, this is at constant pressure, and it is connecting the vapor composition and the liquid composition. So therefore, these two compositions naturally are equilibrium compositions. So therefore, this gives you the composition of the first drop of liquid which is in equilibrium with this particular vapor. So we can just denote it as XF star. Star denotes equilibrium composition, right? Now, instead of this point, if we would have started from this point and we would have cooled the vapor mixture and we would have arrived at this point, then again at this point, we would have found that the first drop of liquid appears, and in this case, the composition of the first drop would have been given by this particular point, right? So therefore, we find that when we start from the superheated vapor condition and we come to the saturated vapor region or the saturated vapor curve, now this curve, it naturally it starts or it lies between the boiling points of the two components. At this side, your more volatile component is 0. So naturally, this corresponds to the boiling point of the less volatile component. And this side, this particular, the end point of the saturated vapor or the saturated liquid region, that corresponds to the boiling point of the more volatile component, right? So therefore, the saturated vapor and the saturated liquid, which signifies the liquid at the point it is about to vaporize, or the vapor exactly at the temperature and pressure where it is about to condense. These two curves, they are bounded by the boiling, or rather they start from the boiling point of the less volatile component and they end at the boiling point of the more volatile component. Naturally, the less volatile component has got a higher boiling point, so therefore it is going to start from this particular portion. Okay, এই আমার ক্লাস চলছিল, একটু পরে কথা বলছি। So therefore, the boiling, the saturated vapor and the saturated liquid curves, they start from the boiling point of the less volatile and continue to the boiling point of the more volatile component. So the temperature of the saturated vapor, that depends naturally upon the composition that from which you have started. If suppose we start with a low composition of the more volatile component, naturally the saturated condition will be closer to the boiling point of the less volatile component. If we start with a composition which is closer to the boiling, or rather start with a composition of say x1 is equals to 0.9 or something, naturally the saturated condition will be closer to the boiling point of the more volatile component, right? So therefore, in this particular case, what you should be noting is, while the boiling point of a pure component liquid is constant, if the pressure is kept constant, the boiling temperature becomes constant. If we are performing the experiments at a constant temperature, then in that case the saturated pressure conditions remain constant, but in this case the saturated condition, the temperature and pressure, that also depends upon the composition of the multi-component or the binary mixture. So therefore, we do not have a definite boiling point or a definite condensation temperature of a binary or a multi-component mixture. It is definitely lies between the boiling point of the more volatile and the less volatile component. But what will be the exact point, exact temperature at which change of phase will start, that definitely depends upon the composition of the binary mixture or the multi-component mixture with which we have started. Point number 1, and point number 2 is that change of phase in this case does not occur at a constant temperature pressure conditions. If the pressure is kept constant, the change of phase occurs over a range of temperature. Again, the start and the end temperatures, they lie between the two boiling points, but what will be the range, that again depends upon the composition of the mixture. So this is the second thing that you need to remember, that for the case of single component systems, the change of phase occurs at a constant temperature and a constant pressure, or in other words, the saturated curve is an isotherm and an isobar. Whereas in case of binary mixtures or for any multi-component mixtures where there are more than one components, then the change of phase is an isobar. In that case, it does not occur over a constant temperature. It can also be an isotherm as in this particular case, but in this particular case again, it does not occur over a constant pressure. It occurs over a range of temperature at constant pressure. This is something you need to remember. Well, now coming back, we find that moment the saturated vapor, it strikes the the superheated vapor, it strikes the saturated vapor region, then the first drop of liquid occurs, and the composition of the drop can be obtained by simply constructing a horizontal line from the saturated curve. The point where it touches the saturated liquid curve, that gives you the composition of the saturated liquid in equilibrium with this saturated vapor. Now, therefore, we find that depending upon the composition of the saturated vapor, we get different points here corresponding to the composition of the saturated liquid. So, therefore, the locus of all the points, which signifies appearance of the first dew of the liquid. So this particular curve, the saturated vapor line, this is also known as the dew point curve. Why? Because moment the saturated vapor touches this particular point, the first dew appears. Right? Now after this, if we start continuing, what do we find? Moment we start continuing here, we find that gradually we enter the two-phase region, which is bounded by the saturated vapor and the saturated liquid curves. Now, when we are in this two-phase region, we find that for each and every point, the overall composition is given by this same point. Okay, the YF or whatever we had started, this particular point. And the liquid and the vapor, they are given by the horizontal line through this particular point, which touches the saturated vapor and the saturated liquid point, right? So therefore, for this particular point, what I would prefer is, instead of YF, I'll put it as ZF, so that Z signifies it can be a vapor, it can be a liquid. In this case, it is a vapor. We can also start from the bottom as well. Now, this ZF at this particular point, this XF star was in equilibrium with ZF. Now, as we continue this cooling, what happens? We find that as we enter the two-phase region, at every point, your YF star or Y star is this point and the corresponding X star is this point. Now again, when we continue this cooling, we find this Y star moves along this, the X star moves along this curve. Now this keeps on continuing till we touch the saturated liquid region. And after that, we find that the entire thing has become liquid. The composition is given by ZF. And then if we continue the cooling, we enter the subcooled liquid region with no change in composition. Now, if now we do the reverse, we start from this point in the subcooled liquid region, and then we start the heating process. What happens? We keep on heating it, the composition remains same. This continues till we touch this particular point, the saturated liquid curve. Moment we touch this point, what happens? The first bubble appears. Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
And what is the composition of this bubble? The composition of this bubble is again obtained by the horizontal line which we can draw from this point. Therefore, the composition of the bubble is given by this point. Now we keep on continuing the heating. The liquid has now entered the two-phase region, which is bounded by the, or rather the saturated or the L plus V region as we call it, which is bounded by the saturated vapor and the saturated liquid curve. So as we enter in this case, we find that at each point, as we continue the heating, the temperature remains, the temperature does not remain constant, the pressure remains constant, and the proportion of liquid and vapor that keeps on changing, right? And we find that the composition of the liquid is given by this particular curve, the composition of the vapor is given by this particular curve. This continues till we reach the saturated vapor line, and after that we enter the superheated region. Now again at this point, if you find that had we started from a different composition of the liquid, then in that case we would have obtained a different composition of the vapor. So therefore each point on this particular curve that corresponds to a state where the first bubble appears. So therefore this particular desaturated liquid line, it is the locus of all the points where the first bubble appears for this particular binary system that we have adopted. Accordingly, this curve is known as the bubble curve. Bubble curve simply is the locus of all the points at which the first bubble appears, and this is known as the dew curve. The dew curve is the locus of all the points where the first dew appears. Now, if you observe that when we are inside this liquid vapor region, then in that case, suppose we are at this point, right? At this particular point, what is the liquid composition is given by this, the vapor composition is given by this. What is the proportion of liquid and vapor that we have? If we have to find out the proportion of liquid and vapor, just by simple mass balance, what do we know? The total amount of the mixture in same moles, that is equal to F. F will be equal to L plus V. Similarly, FZF will be equal to Lx plus Vy. So therefore, from here we can write it down as Lx plus F minus L into Y. From this particular part, what do you get? Can you see if I write it down here? From here, what do we get? We get that L by F equal to, can you do this L by F and tell me what you are going to get? L by F will be equal to, come on.
Yes, I'm doing 1 minute, ma'am.
Do it and tell me. Just simply if you can sort it out, then what do you get?
By X plus Y.
ZF minus, or rather, sorry, Y minus ZF would have been a better thing to write. Just see if, what is it that you are getting? Y minus ZF by ZF minus X. Yes or no? Isn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
So therefore, what does this signify? It signifies that at any point in the liquid vapor region, the proportion of liquid and vapor, they are given by the inverse lengths of these two parts. So therefore this divided by this gives you L by V. So therefore when you have just entered here, naturally the liquid portion is higher. As you go further, liquid portion decreases, the vapor portion increases. Finally, when you come here, you find that the liquid portion is very less, the vapor portion is much higher. Then you come here, it is all vapor, zero liquid portion, and then you leave this part. So now is this curve clear to you? This particular curve, it is similar to the PTT and TV and PV curves that you have drawn. Since it is a binary mixture, so therefore we, and on a two-dimensional plot, we can just plot with two things. So here we have shown T versus X and T versus Y at a constant pressure. And this particular case, we find that both the curves, they meet at the boiling points of less component and the more component the less volatile component and the more volatile component. And between these 2 points, there is one particular region. This region is actually where the two phases exist. It is the L plus V, or the saturated region. In this region, the change of phase occurs, and moment we are away from the region, higher up in the temperature TXY plot, it's a superheated region. Below this, it is the saturated region. Now, the importance of this particular diagram, I'll tell you that suppose you have started with any particular mixture. Let me rub off these things. It will be slightly easier.
Ma'am.
Yes, please.
Ma'am, can you explain that last equation?
Which, this one?
Ma'am, that F plus, yeah, ma'am, this one.
Oh, this equation. This equation is simply your mass balance, or mole balance. What have I done? I have started with, wait, I was about to rub this off. I had started with F moles, right? And the composition of that is ZF moles, right? So I have started from here with F moles. Fine. Now I have entered the vapor liquid region. I have got V moles of, vapor, L moles of liquid, right? What is the composition? If you take a component balance, it is FZF. ZF denotes the composition of the more volatile component, and this will be equal to what? This FZF will be equal to, from component balance of the more volatile component, this will be L into X plus V into Y. X and Y are the composition of the more volatile component in the liquid phase and the vapor phase. You get my point? I have simply done a total mole balance and a component mole balance.
Yes, ma'am.
And then simply I have substituted it here, and I have expressed L by F. Right. From expressing L by F, what I wanted to show is that in this particular region, the proportion of L to V, or the proportion of, even from this you can find out the proportion of L by V. We find that in this I have made a little mistake. This should be L by V. We would find that L by V varies in the inverse length of this region and this region, right? So therefore, how much liquid will be there and how much vapor will be there, that will be denoted by the length of this arm to the length of this arm. So as we go up, we find that the length of this arm decreases, this arm increases, which signifies that the amount of liquid is decreasing, the amount of vapor is increasing. Fine with you now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, fine. Achha, now I will just like to tell you something. See, suppose see, I have a liquid. Okay, the liquid is of this particular composition. It has a very small amount of component A or component 1. You take 1 as the more volatile component. It has a very small proportion of this particular component. And with this, I start heating. I would like to separate component 1 and component 2. Okay, the composition in this case, it is X1. I start heating and then at this particular point, I change it completely, or rather I simply get a liquid vapor mixture. Can you tell me what will be the composition of the vapor which I'll obtain by heating the mixture of composition X1 at constant pressure to this particular temperature T saturated? Right, I heat it to this temperature. What will be the composition of the vapor, you tell me?
After that point, we have to move horizontally.
The
And we have
horizontal line
get
and
that
right.
point.
Therefore, try to understand that starting from this composition, the best possible separation that I can get cannot exceed this point. Do you agree with me? Say suppose,
Yes, ma'am.
suppose this
Yes,
was
ma'am.
This was 0.2 and say suppose this is 0.5. So if I want, suppose I tell you that I have a component 1 and a solution of component 1, say benzene toluene. Okay, I have benzene toluene and in that mixture there is 20% benzene and I want to purify benzene. I want at least 90% pure benzene. Right? How do I do it? Naturally, it's benzene toluene, it's an ideal solution, and for such a particular system, quite naturally, we would like to go for distillation. Now, we find that when we are distilling it means we take up this liquid and we convert it partially to the vapor. Then in that case, the best amount of and then we condense this. The best amount of the liquid that we get out is 50% benzene. I cannot get any particular separation better than 50% benzene in a benzene toluene solution. But I have told you that I require 90% purity of benzene. This is a problem which I give you as an engineer. How are you going to help me out in this? See, as a client,
we can increase the
yes.
Ma'am, we can increase the mole fraction of one component so that the composition changes.
Wait,
The
you
mole
mean
fraction.
to say that we start.
Can you repeat, like your voice break for a while?
Yes, ma'am.
What you mean to say that instead of 0.2 benzene, I start with 0.5 or 0.4 benzene. Is it that what you mean to say?
Yes, ma'am.
See, remember one thing, you are engineers. You are working with natural resources, right? So this benzene toluene mixture that I have got, maybe I have got this from some particular place, or maybe say suppose we were trying to take out crude, and in that particular crude it's not benzene toluene, it is say propane butane, say for example. Okay, so whatever you have got at hand, if you have to improve the composition, you have to added benzene, or sorry, if it's a propane butane, you have to add added propane. From where are you going to get that propane? You're going to buy it from somewhere, and then you are going to add it, then you are going to enrich it, and then again from that you are going to get additional propane. If that is the case, then I'll tell you that I'll keep on buying propane and adding it, and then I'll be getting pure propane. What is the great thing that you are doing in distillation? Do you get my point? You have to work with whatever feed you have. See, you cannot, if you are spending extra money to enrich the feed, then in that case you spend the extra money and to get the pure product. That is not a solution. You have 20%, you have a mixture with 20% propane butane that you have excavated from the natural gas which you have got from your oil well. Right, now this you want to enrich to say for 90% propane, so that you can use it for some more useful purpose. Remember one thing, as engineers, optimization is very important. So you have to keep in mind that you have to do it at the minimum cost and the minimum jhamela also. Because see, you are just going to design it, you are just going to propose. The plant is going to be run by workers who do not know so much of thermodynamics or whatever. So they will do whatever is going to be easy for them. Right? You get my point? So
Yes,
therefore,
ma'am.
can you now tell me that I as a client, I am extremely adamant, I have got some great use with 90% propane. So I come and tell you, sir, you have got a consultancy firm, you do something so that starting from this 20% propane butane mixture, I can get propane of purity 90%. Do something for me. What will you do? Will you tell him, go and buy more propane and add it to the mixture? Definitely no.
Ma'am, we'll heat the new mixture again until we get the desired composition.
Perfect. What do? You increase the number of stages. That means we start from here, right? And we simply vaporize it. When we vaporize it, we are not going to totally vaporize it, mind it. Then in that case, you have entered this region. No, we will stay in this region only and do whatever we can. So therefore, we are going to vaporize it partially. There has to be some liquid left so that the vapor is in equilibrium with the liquid. If you are completely vaporizing it, then from 20% propane butane, you have entered 20% propane butane vapor. Nothing is going to be achieved. So therefore, there has to be a minimum amount of liquid with which this vapor is in equilibrium. Now, at this point, you have got 50% propane butane. Now, this entire mixture, again, you cool it and to condense the whole thing. So what do you have now? You have got a liquid with 50% propane butane. This mixture again you partially vaporize. When you partially vaporize, then in this case, here at this particular point, you have got a mixture which contains 90% propane and 10% butane. This whole mixture now you condense, you get a liquid of 90% propane and 10% butane. You had started with 20% propane and 80% butane. So therefore, you simply increase the number of stages. This particular process of repeated distillation, for which you will be spending almost 3/4 of a semester in your next semester. This is known as rectification. And the design of such distillation column, the design of the stages, they are one of the great challenges which a chemical engineer is supposed to master. But have you understood the need for additional stages? And have you understood that for performing such mass transfer operations, how important it is for you to know the equilibrium composition? Because remember one thing, this equilibrium, that gives you a limit on the maximum that you can. Had the equilibrium been such that in one stage, starting from 20% propane butane, just by partially vaporizing it, you can get 90% propane butane, then your work is done. So first, whenever you have to do a problem, you have to know what is the best that you can get out of it. The best is guided by the equilibrium. The horizontal line gives you the best. If you start from here, the best is here. Start from here, the best is here. Whatever you do, you cannot get better than the best. But remember one thing, in actual practice, you get worse than the best. Because definitely in any particular contacting stages, it's very difficult to attain equilibrium conditions. And again, as engineers, you would not like to keep on waiting for an infinite time for equilibrium to be attained. On the other hand, you would like to have something closer to equilibrium. You would like to design stages where closest to the equilibrium you can attain, and you may add 1 or 2 extra stages such that whatever you are losing by not attaining equilibrium, that can be compensated, and you starting with this particular feat, you can reach this particular product. So therefore, you need equilibrium for two reasons. One is the best that you can get out of it is dictated by equilibrium. Second, in a practical column, whatever you are getting, how far away it is from the equilibrium, that means how badly the column is operating, that you can understand once you know the equilibrium conditions. Say from the equilibrium conditions, you know that the separation that you should get is 50% propane, 50% butane. In the actual column, you find that, well, it is 45%. Chalta hai. Okay, you don't bother. But suppose you get that you are getting just 30%, from you start with 20%, you get just 30%. Then you know that there is a lot of inefficiency. Then you have to find out how to improve the efficiency. Once you have improved the efficiency to an extent where you are close to equilibrium, then you go for multiple number of stages.
Ma'am, in this multiple stages method, like how much of the liquid, I mean, how much does it yield? Like what is the yield percentage?
Perfect. See, there are two things that is often specified. Most of the time, let me tell you, we specify the composition because the purity is very important. Along with that, normally see the way the problems are posed in industry is that we want, there are two things. Either we want to recover 90% benzene from it. This is one particular thing. The other thing, or rather, sorry, I just told in a different way. We want a product which contains 90% benzene. This can be one specification. The other specification can also be that we want to recover 90% of the benzene from this particular mixture. The two problems are different minded. The first problem says that we start with a mixture of 20% benzene and 80%, sorry, again I'm confusing between benzene. Propane butane is a better thing. I start with 20% propane, 80% butane. And from here, I want a product which contains 90% propane. This is one. The other is that in this mixture, I've started with say 100 kgs of a propane butane mixture, which contains 20% propane, right? From here, I would like to remove or like to extract 90% of the propane from here. What does it mean? That means from this 20 kgs, you would like to take out 18 kgs of the propane. It will definitely have some impurities of butane with it also, but you would like to recover this much amount from the mixture. So whatever it is, for every particular thing, you have to know that what is the equilibrium composition, what is the best that you can get, right? And accordingly, you have to progress. You know two things. One is what is the equilibrium. Also, you know that at each particular stage, what is the proportion of the liquid and the vapor that you get from this particular product. Am I clear to you?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, now can you tell me that suppose to get a particular separation, okay, when will you require more number of stages? When this particular gap is larger or when these two curves are closer to each other? What I mean to say is,
Ma'am, if it is smaller, then we will need more steps.
Perfect. So therefore, what I mean to say is very correct. This is T, this is X or Y. So suppose they are very close to one another, right? And we have another case where they are much different from one another. We start say from the same part. In this particular case, two stages are giving you this. In this particular stage, you find three stages will be giving you this. If they are much more closer, then definitely you will be getting many more number of stages. So what does it mean? When the boiling points are closer and when these two curves are close to one another, naturally separation is much more difficult, right? And the degree of separation in this particular case, by how much we can separate the two, that is given by a quantity which is known as the relative volatility between the two phases. How do we define the relative volatility between the two phases? It is defined by the ratio of the vapor pressures P1 saturated by P saturated, and this relative volatility, it is given as alpha, right? Often we denote this as the relative volatility of the two phases. So suppose the diagram, this TXY diagram is not available, but you are given that the relative volatility between benzene and toluene is say 2.5 or something of that sort, okay? Now, one thing is this alpha, it is a ratio of these two. We know that this is also a function of temperature. This is also a function of temperature. Fortunately, their ratio is a lesser function of temperature, right? So therefore, this can be taken to be constant over the entire temperature range. So therefore, either you are given this TXY plots or you are given this alpha value. If suppose alpha value is given, then what do we know? You know that, again let me write it down, X2 P2 saturated by X1 P1 saturated. This is equals to Y, Y2 by 1 minus Y2. So therefore from here we know that Y2 by 1 minus Y2 is nothing but alpha X2 by 1 minus X2, right? And from there we can find out what is Y2 in terms of alpha and X2. Can you tell me? Can you tell me what is Y2 or Y1, whatever, in terms of X2 and alpha? If you can just rearrange and tell me.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, please. This is equal to
That is 1 divided by 1 minus x2 divided by alpha plus 1.
Are the others done or are the others trying?
Ma'am, just a minute.
I do not like one voice. Acha, I'll switch off my, see, you cannot see me now anyhow, isn't it? Can you see me when I'm teaching?
We can.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
I was thinking if my voice is fine, it's all right. Otherwise, I'll switch off my video. Anyhow, then it's all right. Come on. So Y2 equals to?
Alpha x2 divided by 1 plus x2 into alpha minus 1.
For the others. See, the problem is I cannot see you, and when I'm teaching, I cannot even go there and call your names, etc. I don't like it also. So therefore, if the others are not responding, it is very sad. Again, do you have a class test after
Ma'am,
this?
alpha. No, ma'am. We have another class after this.
That I know. Yeah.
And then we have a quiz in that class, not class test.
Heat transfer.
Pardon, ma'am?
Is it heat transfer or what is it?
Yes, ma'am. Heat transfer.
Quizzes are interesting, isn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
Good. Okay. So therefore,
Ma'am, the answer is alpha x2 upon 1 plus alpha x2 minus x.
okay, fine. Or in other words, 1 plus alpha minus 1 x2. Can you see that I have written it down here?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes.
So therefore, see, my point is that even if you do not have a graph, if the alpha value is given, which is more or less constant over a range of temperature and pressure, then in that case also, if you know x, you know alpha, or in other words, you have Anton's constants, you can find out P1 and P2 saturated, you can calculate alpha. For several hydrocarbon sets, etc., alpha is already provided, which makes your life very easy. So for different x, you can calculate y. And accordingly, once you have calculated this, then you can find out the total pressure and other things. So this is one other way by expressing alpha. One is definitely the equilibrium curves. The other is by expressing it with alpha. So am I clear? This part is clear to all of you?
Yes, ma'am.
Same.
Yes,
if you observe here in the PXY diagram also, you will see the same thing. This case also at high pressure, what do you have? This is again at a constant temperature. So at a higher pressure, what do you expect to have? Come on, at a higher
Ma'am,
pressure.
for higher?
Higher pressure. At
liquid will be there.
you are going to have a liquid, right? And then when you keep on expanding the liquid from this particular point, when you keep on expanding the liquid, you reach the saturated liquid curve, or in other words, this is known as the bubble point curve. Same way, if you go on here, you are going to get a liquid plus vapor region, and then on further expansion, what you get, you come at a saturated vapor curve, or in other words, this is known as a dew curve, and then you enter the superheated, or in other words, the expanded vapor region, right? So this is just the reverse. You have the liquid region on the top, you have the vapor region at the bottom. The your bubble point curve is on the top and the dew point curve is on the bottom. It's the same thing, right? So therefore this is one particular thing, and the next thing is, so we can generate PXY diagrams, we can generate TXY diagrams, mark it in all the diagrams consistently. My X1 is the more volatile component. Now, for this particular case, the compositions of the liquid and vapor, sorry. The compositions of the liquid and vapor, they are given by this tie. These are known as these horizontal lines which connect the vapor and liquid in equilibrium. They are known as the tie lines, right? Now suppose you find out the corresponding compositions across these horizontal tie lines, and then you plot them in a X versus Y plot at constant P. You get a curve like this for one being the more volatile component. Had I plotted this curve with the less volatile component X and Y, for example, had I plotted it in terms of X2 and Y2, can you tell me what would have been the nature of this curve?
Like for y1 x1 it is curved downward, for y2 x2 it will be curved upward and will be down the straight line.
Yeah, so it will be below this diagonal, right? So therefore these are the different ways of representing your phase equilibrium diagrams. Mostly we deal with this TXY diagrams, and just as I have told you, we start from here. Your problem as chemical engineers is to find out the number of stages that you require for any particular separation. Say if you want to go from say 0.18 to say 0.88 or something. So the number of stages that you require, that is important. And again from here it's evident that if we would have had a fatter curve, then naturally the number of stages would have been lesser. The thinner you get, the smaller is this liquid vapor region, the more is the number of stages. Right? Now in distillation there is also another type of, wait, let me first create a slide. Okay, there is another type of problem also that you face. Now this type of problem, yeah, so therefore this type of problem, they are known as flash calculations. Where do you face it? You see, remember one thing, for any vapor liquid operation, mainly distillation, finding out the equilibrium composition is very important. Always in industries, be it pharmaceutical, be it oil industry, everywhere distillation is a definite operation, right? The type of distillation may be different. Somewhere you perform in pharmaceuticals, you perform batch distillation. In refineries, you perform your rectification, big columns with lot of stages. Maybe in your internship, or if you go for an industrial tour, you're going to see this thing. Distillation is a must. Now, if you have to perform distillation well, the first thing that you need is the equilibrium data. Now, so therefore, generation of equilibrium data is something very important. Very frequently, we perform something which is known as the flash distillation. This is normally not a very well-known industrial practice, but this is mainly done in order to obtain equilibrium data. Okay, particularly not for binary systems, but for multi-component systems. What do you have in this case? In this case, you simply have a feed. The feed can have any number of components, right? The compositions, the feed can be a liquid, that can be a vapor. Mostly it is either a superheated vapor or a subcooled liquid, or maybe mostly before introducing it into this column, we have a heat exchanger where we convert this particular feed into saturated conditions, so that immediately it enters in the flash distillation column, there is change of phase, right? So in the flash distillation column, we do not have to give any additional heat. We simply decrease the pressure such that change of phase occurs, right? So therefore, it can be a liquid or a vapor feed. Accordingly, we denote the compositions at ZFI. This I can be anything. It can be 1 to n, right? Moment it comes here, This is nothing but this is a partial vaporizer, or you can also call it a partial condenser, depending on what purpose you are going to use it. Now, moment it comes here, change of phase occurs. You get a vapor phase and you get a liquid phase. Remember one thing, as it enters here, the operation occurs at a constant temperature and pressure. This is kept at some particular temperature pressure. The pressure is usually less than the input pressure, so that moment it enters here, it gets depressurized, and as a result, change of phase occurs. Usually that happens. It can also happen that this temperature is slightly below the equilibrium temperature, saturated conditions, right? So moment the feed enters, instantaneously it gets converted into a two-phase mixture, and out of this two-phase mixture, the vapor phases go out through here, the liquid phases go out through here, and you are supposed to, what you know here is you know F, you know the feed compositions, you know the temperature, you know the pressure, and what you are primarily required to find from here is the Y and X. So what you do, there are two things. You can either start with different ZFs and correspondingly find out the T and P. Better what is done, you continue with one particular F, and you adjust the pressure here. Gradually you keep on decreasing the pressure. For each particular pressure condition, you will get some Y and some X at a constant temperature, and accordingly you can plot it, and once you plot it, you can generate a plot of this sort or a plot of either this or this, depending on what you have kept constant, right? So therefore these calculations are also done in the same way. Whatever you do, the starting point is simply the Raoult's law. Normally, if you are operating at low to moderate pressures, then Raoult's law is fine. We do not have to go to the Lewis-Randall rule. We start from this particular case and we find out X's and Y's from all these things. Can you tell me the procedure? Just to summarize the procedure, you know this equation is known to you, okay, for each and every component. So therefore from here, what is Yi by Xi? This is nothing but Pi saturated by P. Now this particular ratio, this is often called the Ki, which is nothing but the equilibrium ratios. For hydrocarbon systems, you find equilibrium data are often given as Ki values, because most of the cases we find hydrocarbon systems, they behave as ideal solutions. So if they behave as ideal solutions, then in that case this Ki is a constant. Okay, so therefore frequently you find that either you get a phase equilibrium diagram or else alpha is provided. Usually for hydrocarbons, instead of alpha, Ki is provided. And if you know some Xi, Yi is nothing but equal to Xi into Ki. So this is known as the equilibrium ratio or the K factor of component I, right? And this K factor, if you find, since it is a ratio of Yi by Xi, which means it's a ratio of Pi saturated by P. So naturally this particular Ki, this is naturally a function of temperature, because Pi saturated is a function of temperature, right? So therefore in this particular case, again the way I had shown you, F will be equal to L plus V. Agreed? And for each particular component I, Fzi will be equal to Lxi plus Vyi. Yes or no? This Vyi, this can be written down as F minus L into Ki Xi. Yes or no? Accordingly, you should be in a position to express Xi in terms of whatever is known. Known means you know F, you know ZF, and you also know Ki. So therefore, you should be in a position to express Xi in these terms. Do it and tell me. Just express Xi in terms of all known parameters and tell me the expression that you are going to get. Just do it and tell me. Is my question clear to all of you?
Yes, ma'am.
Do it, do it, do it. What is it that you are getting?
Ma'am, is it FZF by L plus F minus L whole into Ki?
Perfect. And I have written this in this particular form. If you see, it is usually written in this particular form because just like one of you had asked, what is specified in this particular case is not always the F is specified, but the proportion of liquid that you get, that is specified. So therefore, in this particular case, the procedure of these calculations are, you have to calculate PIS, calculate XI. Once you know PIS and P, you can calculate Ki. Moment you can calculate Ki, the thing is you have to guess, else calculate Xi. For all the Xi's that you have calculated, find out if sigma Xi equals to 1. If it is 1, you are saved, your guessed value of L is correct. If it is not equal to 1, then you have to revise the guessed value and you have to continue. Right? And this is the way by which you find out Yi and you find out Xi. So therefore, there are, I think, two problems which are given here. One is a N-pentane N-hexane N-heptane problem, which forms an ideal solution. The compositions are given, the temperatures are given. This particular mixture, it is fed into a flash vaporizer. Again, as I have said, it is maintained at a constant temperature and a constant pressure. So you need to find out the composition of the liquid and vapor in this particular case. This is a pretty straightforward because the temperature is given. So naturally, you can find out the PIs. Moment you can find out the PIs, you can find out the KIs. And once you can find out the KIs, see the answers are already given here anyhow. These are ZFs, isn't it? This is given. You can find out the Xis and you can find out the Yis. Only thing that you need to do is you are supposed to guess the L value and do it. So I'm going to upload, because in the class, if you're doing it, it's taking an enormous amount of time. I cannot even see you. So therefore, there are two problems here. We are going to upload a few more assignments today evening itself. And these two problems, these are on flash vaporization. So therefore, please do these problems. And the second problem is easy because it is a binary mixture. First problem is the ternary mixture. Normally, remember, for flash vaporizations, we do not deal with binary mixtures. We deal with multi-component, at least ternary or more than that. So therefore, these two, they are flash vaporization. I'm going to upload it, but I'm not going to police whether you're doing it or not. That I leave it on your own honesty. And same type of problems you'll be getting in your final exam, right? So therefore, with this, ideal solution comes to an end. Now my next question is, suppose the solution, see, ideal solutions, as I've already told you, for a very small conditions, we get ideal solutions. Fortunately, as chemical engineers, you have to deal with petroleum, petrochemical industries. And for those particular cases, mostly you're dealing with hydrocarbons, and that too members of the homologous series, or maybe isotopes, isomers, etc. So there, lot of times you can assume the solution to be ideal. But as you know, now the domain of chemical engineering is getting highly diversified. Many of you will be dreaming to get an internship in DRL and places like that. Under those particular cases, again, you will come across filtration, but mostly with non-ideal solutions. There are hardly cases where you will be encountering ideal solutions. So my next take is, what do we do? What do we do, or how do we handle non-ideal solutions? Again, I would like to remind you that you are engineers, so you would like to have some very simple corrections. This is how
handle them in conditions where they would be ideal, like high pressure.
that I told you, isn't it? The conditions where they will be ideal, I think I told you. Let me see if I have the slide. It's conditions C. Always gaseous mixtures are ideal. For the liquid mixtures, remember one thing, it will always be ideal if the chemical and physical properties of the components, they are similar to one another. Right. So the forces of attraction, repulsion in pure state and in solution, they are close. And accordingly, when these particular components, they mix without any, when they mix without any change of volume, without any change of enthalpy change, without any internal energy change, and the mixing is spontaneous, which I have told you. For these particular cases, if you find that always for, this is of course not for ideal, for non-ideal solutions also, we always get delta GM less than 0 and this greater than 0. So therefore, if you are plotting, say, any particular Gibbs free energy with, say, x1, 0 to 1, normally you find that compared to the mixture, this is actually delta G mixture, compared to the mixture, the ideal components, the mixture Gibbs free energy will always be less. There are cases where you find that the graph is something of this sort. When the graph is something of this sort, it means that for this particular region, you have miscible systems. For this particular region, the two liquids are miscible. But for this particular region, had the liquids been miscible, then the Gibbs free energy would have been, means then in that case, if they would have been miscible, then the Gibbs free energy would have followed this path. But in reality, it follows this path, which means that when they mix, the mixing is not spontaneous. That's why from this region to this region, the two liquids, they do not mix. Rather, they prefer to remain as two separate layers. And under that condition, the Gibbs free energy is lower. Right. So therefore, when the properties, rather, how do you know that any particular mixture which is given to you, that is going to behave as an ideal solution? You will know it. Suppose when you mix them and to find that the volume of mixing is 0. You mix them and to measure the temperature before and after, you find that there's no change in temperature, which implies that they're mixing with no enthalpy change of mixing. Okay, so under those conditions, you can find out that the components, rather the solution behaves as an ideal solution. But here I would like to provide a caution to you. The caution is, you will find that there are components, say for example, I'll just create another slide. There are components, say for example, benzene ethyl alcohol. If you take up this particular two, see, they form a completely non-ideal solution, right? But if suppose you plot, say, the volume, the molar volume of the mixture with, say, the composition of benzene, again it goes from 0 to 1, what you find is that the graph is something of this sort, right? So therefore we find that when benzene and ethyl alcohol are mixing, then initially there is a positive, there's an expansion in volume, and then there is a contraction in volume. Now suppose you have mixed benzene and ethyl alcohol, and you have mixed it at this particular composition. So at this particular composition, it will appear to you that these two are mixing without any change in volume. And you would tend to assume that benzene ethyl alcohol, it forms an ideal solution, where in reality it does not form the ideal solution. So therefore, it's safer that whenever you are testing whether two constituents form an ideal solution or not, you do not test it at one particular composition. You are supposed to repeat the tests at different compositions. Same type of graphs you can get for different components when you are plotting your H mixture as a function of composition. There also, under certain compositions, you will find that the two components, they mix without any change of energy or any change of volume. That happens because just before the composition there was an increase in the volume, just after the composition there is a decrease in volume. So therefore the ideal test of ideality of any particular solution is that you should be doing the test at different compositions and different concentrations, and the most reliable test of ideality is that you simply take up you simply mix these particular constituents in different compositions, generate different x1 data, and then for each particular x1 you measure the total pressure and see for the entire range of composition from, says, not from 0, from 0.1 to say 0.99, more or less. For every point you have measured the total pressure and you have plotted it, and to find that, see, you'll never get a perfectly ideal thing. You will find that the experimental points, they fit to a best fit straight line. This is the best test to find out whether any particular solution is ideal or not. Am I clear to all of you?
Yes, ma'am.
So now the next question comes, that lot of things we have done about ideality. The ideal solutions is actually a very easy topic, but I have wasted a lot of time on it. So now I would like to go to how to account for non-ideal solutions, because most of the solutions that you will be encountering in your future will be non-ideal solutions. So what I do is, without your asking, I'm considerate enough, I'll give you a 5 minutes break. Okay, it's 10:25 in my watch. We'll start at 10:30, and in the meantime you just think what will be the case, or how do you account for non-idealities in liquid solutions, which is what you are going to face more, right? We'll be discussing non-ideal solutions, and then we'll be continuing it after Holi, and that is going to be the last topic for us. Is it fine for you?
Yes, ma'am.
So I come back after a 5 minutes break. Okay. Well, so we are back again.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Good. I wanted to ask you something non-academic, but that I'll do after the recording part is over. Anyhow, so now, before we go for non-ideal solution, there is just one thing I would like to ask you. See, when we are dealing with ideal solutions, there's something that we have assumed that the two solutions, rather the components, they are miscible in all proportions. Do you agree with me?
Yes, ma'am.
So first thing is that means we are dealing with only those components which remain liquid over the entire range of composition at the temperature and pressure of the solution. Again, do you agree with me? We are dealing with completely miscible systems. And I've told you that if you have immiscible systems also, the Gibbs free energy of mixing is greater than 0. Fine. But for all these things, what I mean is that we are dealing with systems which comprise of liquids at the solution temperature and pressure. Now suppose instead of alcohol water mixture, I have carbon dioxide water mixture, or say suppose salt solution. In that case, what do you do? In that case, definitely, let me share the slide. Yeah, in that particular case, here only I can show you. This is not good. See, remember one thing, for all components, this is something you must remember. For all components, when it is in excess, then it obeys the ideal solution model. This you got to remember, that whatever be the two components, when any particular component is in large excess and you are plotting fugacity as a function of composition, you are going to find that when the component is in excess, that is for conditions when xi it almost tends to 1, then that component it exhibits ideal solution model. Now suppose that particular component, carbon dioxide water, when water is in large excess, the solution exhibits ideal solution model. I have no problems. Suppose carbon dioxide is in excess, then in that case, this particular state, is it a real state? Is it a feasible state for a carbon dioxide water mixture or for a salt solution? Is my question clear to you?
No, ma'am. Ma'am, can you repeat it once again?
I start with the alcohol water mixture, right? Now I know that when I have water in large excess, then definitely for water, the solution obeys ideal solution model. When I have a large amount of alcohol, for that case also, the alcohol obeys the ideal solution model. Why? Because moment I have a large amount of alcohol, I add 1 mole of alcohol to it, the alcohol is more or less in its own environment, right? Same thing happens for a large excess of water in the water alcohol mixture. So always remember, for any particular solution, whenever that component is in a large excess, definitely that component obeys the ideal solution model. This part is clear to you? So for any particular solution, the component in large excess always obeys the ideal solution model. The other component which is not in large excess, normally for that component, it does not obey the ideal solution model, provided the two components are extremely different physically and chemically. This part is clear to you?
Yes, ma'am.
So therefore, when any component is in large excess, if it is obeys the ideal solution model, so therefore for that component, it is very easy to find out the partial molar fugacity. You just have to know the pure component fugacity. And in other words, if it is at low to moderate pressures, then in that case, in order to find out the partial pressure and to generate the equilibrium data, you just need to know the saturated vapor pressure of that component. Any doubts about this?
No, ma'am.
Now suppose instead of a two liquid mixture, suppose I talk of a mixture of a gas in a liquid or a solid in a liquid. Just as an example, I had told you that instead of an alcohol water mixture, suppose I have a carbon dioxide water mixture. Now for that particular case, when water is in excess, I use this particular equation, I have no problems. When I have a large amount of carbon dioxide in the water, say it is a liquid solution, and I have a large amount of carbon dioxide dissolved in water, under that condition, carbon dioxide should conform to the ideal solution model. Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
If that is the case, then for carbon dioxide, you should be in a position to find out the pure component fugacity in the liquid state or the saturated vapor pressure. Yes or no?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
To
ma'am.
generate equilibrium data. Now you tell me that under normal ambient conditions where the solution is made, under that condition, does carbon dioxide exist in its pure state in the liquid form?
No, ma'am.
So therefore, is this particular finding out this particular PI saturated or FI, is it going to be feasible for something fictitious?
No, ma'am.
Then what do you do? We were happy, firstly, we were dealing only with ideal solutions. Ideal solutions are applicable only for a very narrow range of liquid. The other thing is they are applicable only for two liquid systems, where for both the liquids, this particular state is an actual state, it can be found out, right? And we also found out that ideal solution model is obeyed by any solution whenever the components of the solution are similar chemically and physically, point 1, and point 2, always ideal solution model is obeyed by that component which is in large excess. Agreed? So everything was fine when we are dealing with miscible liquid systems. Now when we are dealing with gas liquid or solid liquid systems, as chemical engineers, we are going to encounter such systems as well. Now, whenever you are going to encounter such systems as well, and in a liquid solution, if you have a large amount of a gas or a solid, say saturated brine solution, or maybe a saturated carbon dioxide solution, then in that case, to generate equilibrium data, you need this. Can you find this out? Am I clear to all of you?
Yes, ma'am.
Same voice, yes and no. For others, is my problem clear to you?
Ma'am, are we going to use Henry's law?
Perfect. Perfect. Under that condition, for the component, the solid or the gas or whatever it is, we do not use the condition for xi tends to 1. We use the condition for xi tends to 0. Now remember one thing, whenever for an actual system you are plotting the fugacity as a function of composition, we find that at very low compositions and at very high composition, the curve becomes linear. And we find the intercept at very high composition that corresponds to the pure component fugacity. And if you extrapolate the linear portion at very low compositions and you extrapolate it, we find that here also it is linear, but this intercept is not the pure component fugacity. Rather, this particular intercept, this corresponds to the Henry's law constant of the component 2 in component 1. The component 2 is the component which does not exist in the same phase as the solution. So I have a liquid solution. This particular Henry's constant corresponds to the component which is not in the liquid phase. It can be in the solid phase or in the gaseous phase. And therefore, this particular constant, it is a function of component 2 in component 1. And remember one thing, for solutions which conform to this type of ideality, they are known as ideal dilute solution, for which we can write Fi is equals to Xi H21, where H21 corresponds 2Fi at Xi tends to 0. So therefore, we have an ideal solution model. We will not go into details of ideal dilute solution because we do not have time. It is just sufficient for you to know that for those particular cases where the component does not exist in the phase of the solution at the temperature and pressure of the solution, for those particular cases, we conform to a ideal dilute solution instead of an ideal solution. For an ideal, all components obey the ideal solution model when it is in large excess. All components obey the ideal dilute solution model or the Henry's law when its composition almost goes to 0. Am I clear to you?
Yes, ma'am.
So just like non-ideal solutions, we will also be having a non-ideal dilute solutions, which we will not be dealing. We'll just be dealing with ideal dilute, just be dealing with ideal solutions, non-ideal solutions. It is sufficient for you to remember that there is also a concept of non-ideal and ideal dilute solution, which are applicable for liquid solutions of gaseous and solid phases. They will also be applicable for gaseous and solid solutions when the other component is a liquid. Okay, so therefore they are applicable for all particular solutions in all particular phases when any of the components of the solution is not in the same phase as the solution. I think I am clear enough. Is this part clear to all of you?
Yes, ma'am.
Now you tell me, we have dealt with ideal solution. We have just mentioned ideal dilute solution. Now you tell me that when you come to a non-ideal solution, what are the immediate things that you expect? And how to account for it?
Ma'am, for non-ideal solution, the vapor pressure can be more or less with the ideal solution, and it depends on the mixing, like whether it is positive deviation or negative deviation.
Perfect. Are you aware of these things, or is it just guess, or maybe you have studied something about this?
No, ma'am. Yesterday I read something about this.
Very good, very good. Who are you, Sneh, or what is your name?
Sneh, ma'am.
Sneh. I would like the others also to participate in this particular way. That would just make me happy. Okay, so therefore this is the phase diagram for an ideal solution, right? For an ideal solution, this is nothing but P1 versus X1. This is P2 versus X1. This is P or PT in whatever way versus X1. This was for an ideal solution. When you have a non-ideal solution, what happens? Naturally, this curve is not going to be linear. You agree with me? Because the whole thing has come from fugacity, the law of ideal solution model, which says Fi is equals to Xi Fi, or in other words, Pi equals to Xi Pi saturated. Okay, from here only this linearity has evolved. So what do we get? We get just the way Sneh has mentioned, we get either there is going to be a positive deviation from Raoult's law. Remember, even when there's a deviation, you can see that at very low and very high concentrations, there is no deviation. I'm showing it consistently. So therefore, you are going to get something of this sort here, right? So therefore, there can be either this type of deviations where you find that Pi is greater than Xi Pi set. Or in other words, you can get deviations something of this sort where you get that Pi is less than, that means the deviation is something of this sort. Okay, you can get a negative deviation from Raoult's law also. For this case, Pi is less than Xi Pi saturated. For this case, Pi was greater than Xi Pi saturated, right? So therefore, we can have positive deviations from Raoult's law, and we can also have negative deviations from Raoult's law. Agreed with me?
Yes, ma'am.
So in this case, very simply, we need to have some corrections, because pi will either be less than this or maybe pi will be greater than this. Therefore, to account for this, very simply, what can we do, you tell me? Very simply, we can simply modify this equation by incorporating a correction factor which will be less than 1 for negative deviations of Raoult's law, which will be greater than 1 for positive deviations of Raoult's law, right? That particular parameter, this is denoted as gamma I, and this gamma I is nothing but it is known as the activity coefficient. This is just a correction factor, simply like you have PV equals to ZRT for real gases and convert as a correction for the ideal gas law. In this particular case also, you are going to have a correction factor which corrects the ideal solution model in order to predict the VLE data for non-ideal solutions, right? So therefore, when the solutions are non-ideal, you simply have to predict gamma I. Am I clear to you?
Yes, ma'am.
Now you tell me one particular thing, be it ideal, be it non-ideal. If I'm dealing with binary solutions, how many components do I have? I don't bother about ideal and non-ideal. Binary solutions, how many components do I have? Come on, C equals to?
2.
Yes, please.
2.
2. Your P equals to?
Vapor, for vapor, liquid, it will be 2.
2.
Yes, ma'am. 2.
So therefore, what is F equals to?
2.
2.
F equals to 2. So therefore, remember one thing, you can keep on defining different parameters, properties, but everything should be defined only by defining two intensive variables of the system. So just the way as I've told you that for ideal solutions, we can either define T and X, P and X, blah, blah. This case also the same things apply. So therefore, we need to express gamma I in terms of composition, temperature, pressure, etc. We need equations for this, but we do not need additional variables to define the system. So therefore, now for non-ideal solution, what happens? We need to define gamma I, and in order to define gamma I, we need to probe how to find out gamma I. Once we know how to find out gamma I, then we simply incorporate gamma I, and whatever we have done to predict vapor-liquid equilibrium for ideal solutions, we shall continue the same for non-ideal solutions. Is this fine for you?
Yes, ma'am.
Now let us see how to predict gamma I, right? So therefore, in order to predict gamma I, moment the solution becomes non-ideal, if you remember, let us go to, if you remember, we had a set of properties for ideal solutions which I have been writing repeatedly. You remember, whenever we have ideal solution, the volume of mixing for the ideal solution was 0. Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Enthalpy of mixing was 0. Internal energy change of mixing was 0. When you go for a non-ideal solution, naturally had these been 0, then the solution would not have been ideal, would not have been non-ideal, isn't it? So definitely there will be some non-zero volume of mixing, some non-zero enthalpy of mixing, some non-zero internal energy of mixing, and also the Gibbs free energy change of mixing will be something in addition to this. The entropy change of mixing will be something in addition to this. You agree with me, yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
So therefore, the non-ideal solution will be having some properties in excess to the ideal solutions. Agreed?
Yes, ma'am.
So just to keep matters simple, we will not go into details of excess properties. We will just use few excess properties simply to express gamma I in terms of composition, temperature, pressure, just for that, because one thing is for sure, we have introduced gamma I here just to predict the non-ideal behavior. Since the behavior is non-ideal, that's why this gamma I has come. And since the behavior is non-ideal, the properties they exhibit some excess property over and above the ideal solution property, right? So therefore, what is an excess property? It is just the difference between the actual property of the solution. It can be any property extensive, definitely not temperature, pressure, right? It is the difference between the actual property of the solution and the property the solution would have had it been ideal at the same temperature and pressure. This is what we mean as the excess properties. Now we find in this particular case, definitely it will have some particular excess volume of mixing, some particular excess enthalpy of mixing, as a result of which the two constituents, they will not mix without any, there will be either evolution or absorption of heat, which normally happens when solutions are formed, isn't it? So therefore, this is the thing which is going to means this is the basic difference between a non-ideal and an ideal solution. Am I clear to all of you?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
therefore, you're feeling very sad. Don't feel so sad. It's not so difficult also. So therefore, whenever we are going for non-ideal solutions, there are certain things that happens. First thing is, whenever we are dealing with non-ideal solutions, the equation becomes Fi equals to gamma I xi Fi, where this refers to the pure component fugacity at the temperature and pressure of the mixture. And also what do we have? We have some excess properties. Excess properties are properties over and above that we'll have in this particular case. So therefore, suppose for any particular mixture, suppose I take up, say, Gibbs free energy excess property. What should it be? It should be the property change of mixing minus the property change for an ideal solution. ID means ideal solution. Ideal gas is always given by a 0 on the top. You agree with me? Or in other words, we can write it down. This, what is this delta GM equals to? This is definitely the property change or the Gibbs free energy change which had happened just because the components they had mixed. Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
So therefore, I'll just elaborate to find out delta GM. I'll start again from the basic equation dg equals to RT dln Fi. Okay, for any particular pure component. Now, when I am dealing with component I in the mixture, how does this equation change? Anybody other than Sneh? When I am dealing with component I in the mixture, then in that case, how does this equation look like? For component I in the mixture, what does Gi become? Come on. For component I in mixture, what does Gi become? You tell me.
Ma'am, is it Fi cap? The partial.
Perfect. Gi bar E Fi cap. Whenever a component I goes into the mixture, it loses its identity, but it contributes to the mixture. It contributes in terms of its partial properties. Agreed? Very good. So suppose I integrate it from the pure component case to the property it is having in mixture. So this will also go from the pure component to the component, to the property it has in mixture. So therefore, from this, what do I get? I get Gi bar minus Gi, that is the partial molar Gibbs free energy in solution minus the molar Gibbs free energy of the pure component. This is equal to RT ln. You can write it down with me. That will make your life simpler. You agree with me? Now this Gi
Yes,
bar minus Gi for each and every component we find this is equal to RTLN Fi cap by Fe. Agreed? Now, if I take this delta G mixture, that means the property change which happened on mixing. What is the property change? If you can tell me, what is the property change which had happened? This was nothing but equal to, for each component Xi, this was Gi bar minus Gi sigma I equals to 1 to N or whatever. Is this part clear to you? The property change of mixing was simply the summation of, for each and every component, it is the pure component property minus the partial molar property. Do you agree with me?
Yes, ma'am.
So therefore, this Gi bar minus Gi is what? This. So therefore, can I write it down as this? This is Xi minded because I'm dealing with molar properties. Xi RT ln Fi, sorry, very sorry. This is Fi bar by Fi. Can I write this down in this particular way? Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
I can write it down, isn't it? Now you tell me, what is this Fi bar by Fi for an ideal, for a non-ideal solution? It is nothing but equal to gamma I Xi. Yes?
Yes, ma'am.
So therefore, is it the only Sneha speaking yes, or is there somebody else?
Yes, ma'am.
Good. So therefore, I'll just copy this last part. So therefore, we find that delta G mixture, this particular case, this is nothing but equal to RT sigma Xi ln gamma I Xi. Agreed? This is for an ideal mixture. What was delta Gm for an ideal mixture? It is just this part. You agree? So therefore, delta Gm for an ideal mixture is simply RT sigma Xi ln Xi. Yes or no? So therefore, what is the excess property, which is nothing but delta Gm minus delta Gm ideal? What is this equals to? This minus this. What does it give? This is equal to Xi RT sigma Xi ln gamma I. Fine. So if this is a binary mixture, what do we have? We have Ge equals to, or rather G by RT if I take it, then in that case G by RT will be equal to X1 ln gamma 1 plus X2 ln gamma 2. Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Now for any mixture, what do we know? We know that the property, any property is equal to X1 G1 partial molar excess property plus X2 G2 bar by RT. Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Which tells us G1 bar E is nothing but equal to RT ln gamma 1. And this is the way by which gamma 1 is found out. What we do, we have several excess Gibbs free energy model. Now remember one thing, if we have to go to the molecular level and find out the equal unequal interactions and then try to find out gamma 1, it is going to be a Herculean task. So what we have some algebraic equations to find out gamma 1 and gamma 2. We use those particular algebraic equations, find out gamma 1 and gamma 2, and then we find out the Txy, Pxy plots. The only problem is if you have to use algebraic equations, they are all empirical equations. You do not know whether the equations are thermodynamically consistent. So therefore, in order to test the thermodynamic consistency of those particular equations, we need to test them with Gibbs-Duhem equation. So we continue in the next class with non-ideal solutions. We'll just be dealing the Gibbs-Duhem equation and the algebraic equations and try to find out how gamma 1 can be predicted and then generate PXY data. So I was thinking this Wednesday I'll not take an extra class, but I think if I take an extra class, it is going to be convenient for you because then I can go a bit slow. So this is the last Wednesday possibly where you'll be having an extra class. And so therefore next Wednesday also we meet from 11 to 1. Is it all right for all of you?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
So then I can go a bit slow and it will be easier. We can also do a few problems. Okay. So you'll be having a lot of fun in Holi, etc. And then we meet. Anyhow, Friday it's a holiday. So we meet for 2 hours on Wednesday, 1 hour on Thursday, and that should finish off the course. Right? And then we are going to have a test on next Wednesday. Next Thursday also, next Wednesday also come prepared with calculators, etc. You will be doing problems maybe, and we'll be discussing it out. So thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
One request is please go through the things, and if you can come out with your doubts and discuss them, then possibly it is going to be slightly easier. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much.